Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider. Matthew Coller here, and look who it is, looking interesting. Mike Renner of CBS Sports and Pushing the Pile podcast with Kyle Long. And for those listening on the audio version, there's a mustache. It is telling that you live in Florida now with the shirt that you're wearing, but you are the same Mike Renner, ready to talk about the NFL draft. So what is I gotta ask, what's with the look? I mean, what are we doing here?
I think the mustache actually might come through on the audio version. I don't know. You guys tell me if I'm wrong. But I don't know. I just needed a change. I've been rocking just like stubble for the longest time because when I like go clean shaven, I'm 34 years old, but I look like a child, and I hate how I look completely clean shaven. So this was kind of the in between. We talked about a little before the mustache kind of having a moment. I tried it out. I liked it. Fiance liked it. That's all I needed. It's gotten rave reviews.
When you look at the NFL Combine, you see a lot of guys who are rocking a mustache. It is a look. It's kind of coming back from the 70s. So, and I think that it will enhance your work here. I was listening to you talk with Sam and Steve on the Check the Mike podcast. I was like, I don't know. It's a different edge. There's a different Mike Renner here. So here's what I got for you. I have 4 Minnesota Vikings plans that they could execute on draft night, and I want you to analyze all of these plans. So why don't we start out with the first one, which would be the most obvious way to handle the NFL draft for a team, which is staying at the number 24 overall pick and picking the best player available. Considering all the things that the Vikings were able to do in free agency, Mike, I feel like this one is very plausible because they don't have to reach out to grab a particular need. How would you feel about that?
Best player available never works. No, you need to go grab a need. You got to trade up for it too. Now, I mean, this is obviously you're in that position where you just need to draft well. You know, when you have a rookie quarterback deal, you just need good players. So it doesn't really matter where they play. You just need those players to be making an impact on the roster and be doing it cheaply, which is like the whole notion of why you need to draft players instead of signing them in free agency is because you get that deal on that rookie contract. So, yeah, I think that's good. I'm wondering how many of these 4 involve Aaron Rodgers. I assume all 4 do, but we'll obviously discuss that afterwards. But no, I do think the Minnesota Vikings right now, you did your big swing last year, right? Last year was this massive quarterback, edge rusher, trade all their picks to go get it done. Whew. Now it's like just keep the ship moving in the correct direction. So that strategy for the Minnesota Vikings, nothing drastic needs to be made here.
So the problem with staying at 24 is that the Vikings have very few other picks. If you add up all the value to the picks, they are, I believe, last in the entire NFL. In fact, the other day I was asking your colleague, Chris Trapasso, hey, if the Vikings were to trade all their picks up for somebody, who would it be? And he was like, they could only get to like 15 or 16 if they traded every pick that they have. So there is not a lot of juice to this draft outside of 24 for the Vikings. The next pick is going to be 97, which we will get to trade downs and things like that. I think the natural question is, though, who is going to be the best player available if they stay at 24? Because I really like this draft, Mike, between 15 and 40 and that kind of range. And every time I run a draft sim, I end up with really good players there. Just right now, just pulled it up just before we started, ran a draft sim at 24. Malachi Starks, Walter Nolan, Gray Zabel, Derek Harmon. These guys were all on the board. And I know it's not a perfect thing with the draft sim, but there's almost no world where there's not a very good prospect for the Vikings at 24.
I agree. I think there's about 20 guys in this draft class. I don't want to say like first round grades. I don't really ever do like that first round grade, second round grade, but like guys who I just feel very good about, very confident about. And that includes like some other positions that maybe some teams don't draft in the first round: running backs, linebackers, tight ends, whatever. But 20 guys who I just feel good about their projection. And after that 20, it's like 21 versus 40. It's not that big a deal. So if you can nab one of those top 20, and of those, Malachi Starks is one, of those, Derek Harmon's one. And the way the draft works is usually you do, right? Usually one of those will fall to you at 24. So if you can nab one of those 20, I'm happy. If all those 20 are gone, it's obviously a rarity. Last year Quinyon Mitchell fell to almost this spot. Taron Arnold, I think, was like at this spot. So like it happens that one of those guys can fall. But if they're all gone, yeah, by all means, you're trading back then at that point because, like I said, 21 versus 40, 35, you're really splitting hairs on the evals there.
So let's talk about some of the guys that might be available. I mean, you mentioned Malachi Starks. To me, the way that he moves is just different for that position. There's just something to it. Like, do you remember when was it Stingley did his pro day, and all you had to do was see like one clip of it, and you went, "Whoa, okay, that's not normal for how a human being is able to move." I feel a little bit of the same way with Malachi Starks, but for the Vikings, a safety in the first round, that's not one of the positions we usually talk about. And the last time they did it from Georgia, it didn't exactly work out. That wouldn't factor into my analysis, but I'm just saying that position does not carry the same type of weight as some of the other spots. But is he worth that first round pick?
Yes, 100%. To me, it's very similar to Brian Branch coming out in that you can look at the measurables and stack them up historically, do all that you want. Just go watch the film and see what this guy is capable of. Every single play, he is playing the fastest of anyone on a Georgia defense that's loaded with, obviously, every year it's loaded with NFL talent, but he's the one consistently the first mover to action. And his versatility, like that's one that I've put Malachi Starks to the Vikings so many times. One, because you lost Cam Bynum. Two, because just if you wanted him to even play outside cornerback, like when you go watch his reps where he plays man coverage in the slot, it's like, I think he could do that. And I think he could do it at a really high level. The guy's just a football player through and through. And that's a scheme and that's a coaching staff in Brian Flores that, dude, he takes advantage of those guys. That roster is full of those guys, right? It's just like you don't measure their impact on a combine workout sheet or anything of that sort. They're just guys that know how to play the game. He's the guy that knows how to play the game.
Right. And I look at him as somebody that could play in the box, could play deep. And you know that Brian Flores is going to line up guys all over the place. I think safety in this system has more positional value than it would normally. And that's how, like, when we use analytic studies and things like that, we always have to factor in the team context, the defense context, and how you're going to play someone. And at this very moment, their safety position is fine for next year. Harrison Smith, this team really likes Theo Jackson. They signed him to a contract. Josh Metellus is a key player here. But every year we're going to do is Harrison Smith still going to play? And not only that, they like Theo Jackson. But if you're talking about adding someone who could be a potential star next to Twilight Harrison Smith, I really like that idea. Now, I want to ask you about the defensive tackles, Nolan versus Derek Harmon. I've heard very good things about Derek Harmon. I think locally, he's someone that's being circled a lot for the Vikings. They spent a lot at that position, 2 30-plus-year-old guys on shorter-term contracts. But compare those two because they seem to be the two that come up a lot toward the back end of the first round.
Harmon's far more versatile. And so for that, he'll be on far more boards. Like no scheme is going to take Derek Harmon off the board because he can get up the field. He can play blocks and just, two gap. He can do basically all the things you want a defense tackle to do, even if, maybe there's not an aspect to his game that's necessarily elite at this point, but it's like, he's so clean. And so I'd be surprised. I'm pretty high on him. I think he's top 15 guy on my board. I just would be surprised given that those guys tend to go higher because then every single guy has him on their board. Whereas Walter Nolan's like a 3-tech, pretty much 3-tech only, not playing him on the interior. Now he can play the run. He's uniquely good at playing the run for a 3 technique guy. Usually when we say 3-tech only, you're thinking like just pass rusher, but he's a great run defender just in a much smaller, tighter frame that if you threw him at the nose tackle position, he would not be able to hold up double teams consistently. Ask him to 2-gap, he just might not get off blocks consistently. So I think that's the biggest difference between the two. I have Nolan just slightly higher. I love both of them. I think they're both awesome DT prospects. Nolan's slightly higher because I think the athlete is better, but it's like, man, Derek Harmon's combine is pretty damn good for a jumbo, big time, large defensive tackle. So either of those guys, I'm sold. I mentioned my top 20. Those guys are both one of those. I feel very good about them translating to the league.
Well, and I think the fact that the Vikings went out and signed the players that they did in Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave, it kind of tells you that they're okay with guys who are just going to go after the passer and they'll fill in those other spots. And I've always thought, I mean, look Jonathan Bullard last year was a $3 million player for the Vikings and was a good run stuffer for them on the D-line. They've got Harrison Phillips there. I don't think they necessarily need someone who will do absolutely everything. I would prefer that myself, but if it's someone who just gets after the passer, I think that's okay, and they'll work it out otherwise. Kenneth Grant, is he off the board by this time for sure?
I don't know. I've seen opinions of him all over the map. I'm truthfully far lower on Grant than the consensus. And like his pro day was good, but I don't think it was quite what he was being billed as, right? Like we heard 4.8s and it was a 5.1. That's like the classic Michigan thing in recent years. Every guy comes in the freaks list, they're top 5, and then they go to the combine and you're like, this guy's a freak. He's just like kind of good athlete, but nothing great. That's my Notre Dame homer rant there against Michigan. But I do just think he is not going to be the pass rusher that the other two guys are. He's just not built like that. And while he's literally explosive, he's not laterally explosive. He doesn't have the agility to make guards, centers miss. He just has to play through them. So much more of a run defender, but he has great range in the running game. And in this nose tackle class, like if you're looking at pure nose tackles, he's kind of got like a Dontari Poe-esque potential to be that guy who's, everyone, so few nose tackles in the league can do anything as a pass rusher. He could at least give you something. And so more often than not, those guys get picked. So 24, yeah, I do just think the NFL will probably covet him a little higher than maybe the other two.
I was thinking like a Delvin Tomlinson for somebody who played here, where the guy's going to get 30 pressures because he can rush the passer a little, but it's not going to be a 5+ sack type of player. And you love that player on your team, but it's not quite the same impact as somebody who is consistently getting into the backfield. Let me scoot back over to my list. Are you on the train of Darius Alexander as a first round pick or not?
I'm not. I think he's a talented guy. I think he's got a really high floor. I worry about really, really old defensive linemen that didn't quite dominate. He's so old, going to be 25 as a rookie. And that just gives you such a, like, especially at DT, because it's such a strength-based position. And for as much as maybe you can't improve explosiveness and those sort of traits that much from 21 to 25, you can get a lot stronger physically. And so the fact that he's really not overpowering on a consistent basis at that age, there's probably just not a next step to his game. Or you just worry about that being the case. There's not a next step to his game. So I think he's a fine player again. I think he's a high floor, and I think he's probably more of a second rounder, but that's just not quite a first rounder for me.
Okay, yeah, I've kind of had Nolan and Harmon as circled as the two guys that would be most likely if they went DT. Now, interior offensive line is another one where they invested a lot in Will Fries and in Ryan Kelly, but the left guard position is open-ish. The guy who played there last year, Blake Brandel, was okay. If he has to play, it's not like your offensive line's going to collapse, but I think there's a few guys who you could make an argument that if they were slotted in here would be true impact players. Gray Zabel is one of them. And then Tyler Booker, there seems to be a lot of different opinions on Tyler Booker. I have gone back and forth. I've talked to some people who really like Tyler Booker and are like, hey, man, doesn't matter what he did at the combine. At the same time, I saw a tweet from a guy who covers the Bengals, Joe Goodberry, about guys who had the relative athletic score below where he's at, who were big and talked about it. Oh, it doesn't matter what they did at the combine. Not a very high hit rate when it comes to those. Hey, this guy is massive, but has no real quickness or speed to his game.
Yeah, I still am in on Tyler Booker. I just think his technical prowess is so good. And for all his other bad measurables, his short shuttle wasn't a disaster. Like his short shuttle was okay. And that to me is the measurable that if I'm projecting the guy who plays the way he does, definitely a phone booth type of guard. If I run any sort of stretch zone, if that's an aspect to my running game, I am looking elsewhere. I don't, he's been mocked to Miami a lot. And I'm just like, there's zero chance Miami drafts this guy. He's just not athletic enough. He has to be in a duo heavy, power heavy, gap sort of scheme, inside zone heavy, just not get him wide, stretch zone, those sort of things he can't do. But he has an insane frame. I mean, a lot of guards that, are lesser athletes, you need another trait to get by. He's built like an offensive tackle. I mean, he's 34.5-inch arms, 11-inch hands, 321 pounds. Like he gets by on other traits that help him out. Massive wingspan. Like that can still get by. And now, I don't, there's been very few guys reach like all pro status with his athletic testing, right? I think it's probably going to limit him to a degree at the NFL level, but he's the most impressive, I think, offensive lineman in this class, just on a play for play basis consistently. Just like technically, if I had to bet on anyone being, who has the highest PFF grade of any offensive lineman in this class year one, it'd be Tyler Booker.
So how do you feel about Zabel? I mean, you're making a big jump from NDSU. We've seen guys make that jump before. That's why they have the Senior Bowl, and it apparently looked really good down there. I kind of keep touting this one because of his athleticism. And you mentioned how a team is going to run. The Vikings don't run the Shanahan super wide zone, but they do a lot of zone stuff.
Yeah.
And they just picked up Jordan Mason, who is a zone runner. So I wonder if that would be a better fit for them.
Yeah, I think it would be. I think that's more of the guy you're targeting. And him, if I just go back to last year's class, because last year had so many interior offensive linemen, right? I probably would have put him behind Graham Barton in that year's class. So like last year, he probably would have been around 40 on my board, but this year he's closer to 30, just basis of like who's in this class. I think he's going to be good. I'm not sure I see, high end power to his game or play strength that really gets you excited about what his ceiling could be at the next level, but he's a great athlete. And for him to do what he did at the Senior Bowl, playing multiple positions and using his hands as well as he did, it just speaks to his natural coordination. I think the guy's going to figure it out. I think he's got a super high floor. And again, if you're going to run him, if you're going to put your guards on the move a good amount of time, he's much, much more athletic than Tyler Booker.
So is there a guard, or let's throw a couple other positions in here. I mean, even like cornerback, where I haven't seen a ton of cornerbacks in the late first mocked. Is there a interior lineman or say a corner that you think is worth sticking and picking at 24?
For the Vikings, no, I don't think so. I have all my corners past 24. So Jade and Will Johnson, I assume, are gone. Travis Hunter too, but I think he's more of a wide receiver. Assume they're gone. Interior offensive lineman, I said Tyler Booker. I have him higher. I have him in my top 20. I think he's just going to be very good at the next level, not the scheme fit. So after that, I don't think any interior or cornerback is worth pick 24.
Well, that sounds like we should go on to plan number 2 then, Mike,
Sure.
which is plan number 2 for the Vikings is trade down to the early second and take a cornerback there, which I think other than guard is their biggest need, and then add guard and maybe a project defensive tackle to develop behind your veterans in the middle rounds. How do you like plan number 2 for the Vikings?
Yeah, I like this one too. And again, for a team with little draft capital, it will depend on who's on the board. Like I said, if Malachi Starks is on the board, I just stay and pick him. I think he's that good. If he's gone, if Harmon's gone, if Nolan's gone, it's like, sure, I'm trading down. And the cornerbacks, Savone Revel from ECU after his ACL tear, he probably won't be a first rounder. Benjamin Morrison from Notre Dame with his hip injury, probably not going to be a first rounder. If I had just seen those guys fully healthy with their tape last year, I probably would have said 24. Yeah, go ahead and pick them. But obviously you do have to discount with injuries. Kwesi, no stranger to discount with injuries. That's all he did in free agency, right? I think he recognized market inefficiency there. Maybe he's going to do the same thing in the draft and target one of those guys after trading down. Because that, again, those guys talent-wise, if you just watch their tape, it's better than where they likely ended up drafting just because the nature of injury, the injury risk and re-injury risk, especially when this is, I think, Morrison's second hip injury. So, but both those guys, their tape is probably, again, after those top 3, Hunter, Johnson, Barron, those two guys have the best tape in this corner class, in my opinion.
So you think Barron will be gone? I've kind of felt the same way, that once he had the combine, that he probably will be.
Yeah, I do. So many guys just like love him. So, and it's hard not to, he doesn't tick every box. He's got sub 30-inch arms, but his play style is just so tailor-made for what a lot of teams are doing around the NFL schematically, with his ability in off coverage to see through receivers. I think he'll go higher.
Yeah, I feel the same way and we were talking about this the other day, just about how even a few years ago, it was get the lockdown corner, get that, line him up on the outside, one-on-one with the wide receivers. And then every offense went, you know what if we just didn't let teams do that? and we just moved all our receivers all over the place. And I think the skill set for elite corners has mostly changed outside of a handful of guys who try to run through those bunches and run with those motions, but that's just really hard to do. So I think Barron is a perfect fit for that. Now, when it comes to the other guys, the one that stood out to me the most for a Vikings fit was Trey Amos. But at least if I'm looking on the board and I'm draft simming here, Hairston is kind of interesting. I don't know how you figure out what Revel is going to be with such a small sample size. And maybe a sleeper here would be Darian Porter after he had the really great combine. How do you weigh those guys?
Yeah, so Amos, I think, just solid across the board. To me, of those, he probably has the highest floor, but also the lowest ceiling. He's just probably going to be a good NFL player, kind of like how I felt about like a Kool-Aid McKinstry last year. I didn't think Kool-Aid, I don't think anyone's going to name him a Pro Bowler anytime soon. But if he's a bust, I'd just be very surprised. That's kind of how I feel about Amos. Whereas Darren Porter, like, very well could be a bust. The guy's barely played football. He only just switched to corner a couple years ago, and his traits are off the charts, but he's the worst tackler in this cornerback class. Didn't show much interest until like the second half of the season. That's the only reason he got to see the football field. But if you want to play man coverage, no one else in this class, I can include Travis Hunter in that, has better traits to play man coverage. The guy is a freak of nature in every sense of the word. So yeah, that guy, this is where he's in my top 50, right at the back end. But he is going to be just a player I'd bet on because of what he could be if he hits. Harrison's just like trim. He's very fast, but an undersized corner. And so I think another guy who got hurt this past year, didn't put out his best tape, better tape probably as a sophomore, but 4.2s helps a lot at the cornerback position, it especially when you're playing man coverage. So I don't love him matching up against bigger wide receivers, but I think he has, a nice blend of some upside, but also has put out some good tape already that Darren Porter probably doesn't have.
The reason I like Amos the most for this is, well, one, I think that Brian Flores likes guys who do a lot of things well, as we talked about. I also think that he is not that interested in, wow, you have amazing traits and you can't play football that well. And I think, at least from the way that he's been talked about, like maturity, he's played a ton of football, which I also think matters to this coaching staff. They don't want to bring in guys who they have to teach how to play. And when we talk about being solid at a lot of things, but not really great, I mean, I think of Byron Murphy, who they just paid, of someone who is really good at a lot of things, understands the defense extremely well, but doesn't have some insane, oh my gosh, he runs a 4.2 type of thing. So I have been looking really closely trying to figure out Brian Flores fits because I think that he is a huge element of who they're going to draft.
Yeah, I like that call out. And of that, Amos fits that bill for sure.
How about middle round corners and DTs? Would this be a quality? Let's say you're a team that doesn't have that much draft capital in the middle rounds. Is this a draft to wait on guard and defensive tackle?
It is uniquely good to find DTs in like the third and fourth round, in my opinion. I think there will be guys, whether it's always hard to project where someone's going to go, but I think like Tyleik Williams, Alfred Collins are your two, Darius Alexander, TJ Sanders. Those are probably like round 2 DTs. You're probably not going to get them. But after that, someone like CJ West from Indiana is an awesome run defender. Someone like Joshua Farmer from Florida State is like this incredible physical specimen with not a lot of production to speak of. Jamari Caldwell is like a great nimble nose tackle. There are so many mid-round DTs that I like in this class that's the one position where like year on year, this is unique. Usually by the third round, you're like scraping to find someone who can see the field if you have defensive tackle. I think this year there will be a bunch of guys at defensive tackle that can see the field for you. So it's a good deep class in that regard. Corner, I think a little differently of. To me, this is so thin, this cornerback class. It's just, you got some okay top guys. You got that middle group that we've talked about. And then after like the guys we've talked about, AZ Thomas from Florida State's probably going to be like a second rounder. I really like Jacob Parrish from Kansas State. I think he's like a third rounder, but there's not a lot of guys who I am for sure that they will be day 2 corners after that. I think we may have touched every single one at this point there. I'm like, that guy is definitely going to go day 2. There's no one else in this class I can point to for sure and say that. So it's thin in that regard. So if you are draft one, fourth, fifth, it might not be necessarily the year to do so.
How about the guard position in the middle? If they wanted to try to get a starter there in the middle round.
So this year's offensive line class is interesting because true guards and centers, guys who played guard and center at the collegiate level, it's awful. It's one of the worst classes I've seen for those guys. I don't think I have a true guard or center. I'm trying to think. No, I have one. I have one true guard or center in my top 100, and it's Willie Lampkin, the North Carolina, the 5'10" and a half guard, just because his tape's that good. But obviously, that's not going to be for everybody. Vikings fans uniquely know that your undersized center sometimes can be can be a liability in pass pro. So after that, it's all tackle converts. It is all going to be guys like a Wyatt Milam from West Virginia, like a Jonah Savaiinaea from Arizona. That's just like they played tackle in college. You're going to ask them to play guard. So there's a lot of tackles. It's a deep tackle class, but that's where you're going to have to find your interior offensive lineman, in my opinion.
All right. Plan number 3, which is trade down twice. I did this in a draft sim, and I moved all the way from 24 to, I think, 45. And I was still not terribly unhappy. And I think when you have 4 draft picks in a draft, it's not the craziest thing to try to just stack human beings who are young and have cheap contracts, especially when you look forward. And I know JJ McCarthy washes out a lot of this. The 2025 quarterback for the Vikings, absolutely, unequivocally, JJ McCarthy. He makes this a lot easier with the salary cap, which, we've been over 100 times. But I also wonder how far you could go and still feel like you're getting a quality prospect that could be a starter.
Yeah. And I agree with that, because you look at this Vikings roster and say, you always have to, or how I always evaluate rosters is how many guys are on rookie contracts contributing, right? Versus how many guys are on, either vet or free agent contracts. And with the Vikings, the scale is tipped heavily towards vets and free agents. They do not have a lot of contributors. Like the Jets have more contributors, and the Jets are like an awful team, obviously, but they have far more contributors because you can always go out and pay guys, right? You can always go find free agents and sign them to be on your roster, but it's hard to have those guys who are cheap playing way above their contracts. Vikings have been great at identifying free agents that are better than that, but I do agree that keeping that young base is something that's going to be completely necessary because, next time, say like Blake Cashman's contract comes up, Brandon Van Ginkel's there, they might be getting more. Like they might be commanding more, and all of a sudden you can't afford them. So more picks, the better. Where it stops for me, looking at my board right now, I think once I get to around 80, I'm like, these guys are not guys I like anymore. So very back end of the third round, I'm not super excited about guys I'm drafting or necessarily. I think the talent could be tough, kind of how we saw the Packers last year drafted like special teamers at the back end of the third round. I was like, what the hell are they doing? It could be similar this year where you're already down your board. So I don't think it's that deep, but I do think there is this unique kind of area in this draft class that just, if I just look at one board to another, 40 to 80, they are all over. I mean, there is just a group that there is no consensus on in that area of this draft. So there's a lot of jumbled mess when it comes to day 2. There will be a ton of surprises. Last year, I thought there was a fairly, I don't want to say consensus, but like you kind of knew how the draft was going to flow. This year, I have no clue how the draft is going to flow. It is unique in that regard that really evals are all over the map this season.
Which makes me wonder about trading down, and if a lot of teams see this in the same way, like how challenging will it be to trade down? I mean, I guess we always do get to draft night. Somebody's like, whoa, that guy was so high on our board. We got to go trade up, like kind of the Vikings did last year with Dallas Turner. But I also think that if the word is out, if everybody is coming to the same conclusion, because I've heard it from you and I don't know, 10 other people, how strong this draft is in that middle area, it might be a challenge for the Vikings to get other teams to want to move up with them, unless maybe someone's trading for Jackson Dart or something. If a quarterback is hanging around, It's just hard to find too many scenarios when you actually look at the teams that are drafting in that early second where you go, oh, well, that team's going to be super desperate for this, because a lot of the positions have multiple guys that should be good in those spots.
Yeah, but it does always happen just because of positional runs, right? If a well's running dry, say at, wide receiver, and well's running dry and you really wanted one, you're 10 picks away, it's like the urgency always ends up creating itself at some point in the draft. So I think there will be something like that. I don't foresee it. There are a lot of well-run teams now. There are a lot of teams that understand the rationale you just outlined. There's still a lot of teams that don't, and still a lot of teams that panic come draft night.
All right. So before I tell you plan 4, you have a guess what plan 4 is? We've covered a lot of ground here, a lot of different guys, a lot of different ideas, but I got a curveball here for you.
Oof. Would it be to trade up to the top 10?
If only that were possible, I would say yes. Maybe I would have thought of that, but I think they'd have to reach into 2026.
Is it a trade JJ McCarthy plan 4?
That is also not in the mix.
Oh,
Here's plan number 4. It's not completely foolish. It is take a wide receiver at 24 and apologize to absolutely nobody. This is what we call the patented Purple Insider plan. I love this plan. I'm writing about this plan, and I will fight people in the streets about it. Let me lay it out for you before you react to the plan. Because, you're laughing. Everyone's like, oh, this guy loves wide receivers. What is he, silly? Well, here's the thing. Look at the wide receivers who were acquired in free agency or trade this offseason. The DK Metcalf gets wildly overpaid after one of his worst seasons of his career. Cooper Kupp has played 34 or 33 of his last 51 football games, and he got $15 million a year. Deebo Samuel has had how many injuries, down production, unhappy guy. A team trades for him even with not the most favorable contract and a bunch of void years and everything. And then you get to actual free agency and people are paying like Josh Palmer, Tutu Atwell. There's nothing available. And older Devontae Adams gets almost top dollar to go to the Los Angeles Rams. Receivers do not become available. And I'm going to throw you a crazy stat here, Mike.
Mm-hmm.
25 guys with at least 85 targets last year, top 25 by PFF. Guess how many were doing it with their second team or more? Like not their first team that drafted them. Out of 25, the top 25 graded wide receivers.
How many? So
top 25.
So I'll say 20 were doing it with their first team. 20 of the 25.
You're very close. 22. Ooh, so 3 guys out of the top 25 of the highest targeted players were doing it with another team. And one of them was A.J. Brown, which the Tennessee Titans were doing crack when they decided to trade him away. So and the other one was, I think, Jacoby Myers, who's kind of just the guy.
Uh-huh.
And one more after that. Devontae Adams was the other one. I mean, I think that if you want wide receivers on your football team, you have to draft them. And Jordan Addison is going to become expensive soon. There's been some off-field stuff. There's some concern. And you can't probably pay a Jordan Addison 20 plus, whatever it's going to be in a couple years with Justin Jefferson. There's the entire case to draft a receiver 24.
Which receiver? You tell me the receiver and I'll tell you how I feel about it, because I feel differently about these guys for sure than maybe the consensus. So which receivers are you taking there?
Okay, the one that I like for this is Luther Burden, because I think he's a great fit for a typical sort of slot guy who could catch and run, break tackles, stuff like that. I mean, I think you put him with 2 deep wide receivers, pair him underneath with TJ Hawkinson. I mean,
Burden's a yes for me. I like that. I think Tet McMillan would be a yes for me. I think anyone else would probably be a no for me. Those two, I do think are the best 2 in this draft. I think Travis Hunter's the best, but I think those 2 are the next 2. And I think both have unique enough skill sets that can play alongside. Whereas if you just threw in, say, Matthew Golden or Emeka Egbuka, they just feel, I don't want to say redundant, but they're just not bringing a new skill set to the table that you can deploy in a certain way. And then I think also in this class, there are more than probably any class in recent memory. There's a lot of speed receiver options who aren't ones, aren't twos, but they would be a great third option when you have Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison. and there's just a bunch of Kyle Williams from Washington State, Jalen Lane, Virginia Tech, Lambert Smith from Auburn. There's a bunch of guys who aren't going to be, featured in an offense anytime soon, but they can get vertical. And if you forget about them in that scheme, all of a sudden, if you're paying too much attention to Josh Jefferson, you're paying too much attention to Jordan Addison, they can be massive big play guys. So I would wait. Pick 139 comes on the board. I'm sneaking one of those guys in there, and I'm saying, that's a dimension to our offense that usually, like a third wide receiver, just he needs to bring something different. So I'll say, yes, if it's one of the first two. No, if it's anyone else.
Well, and I do like the middle round guy, and it's sort of funny how timing works. Like, I did a draft simulation article where I took Kyle Williams in the middle rounds, and then I hear you talking about him, and then I see everybody posting all of his film clips and everything. And I think that the Vikings will do this. I think they will draft a wide receiver at some point, but the way I look at it is those really excellent wide receivers who you take in the first and second round, they stay with their teams for a really long time. They are super valuable. Even if the guy gets 47 catches for 600 yards, how much would that be worth in the free agent market? $20 million? I mean, I think that is, if you look at it through that lens, and also you have JJ McCarthy and anything that makes him better. This is why I like a guard in the first round, even though that's not necessarily the right positional value. Anything that makes JJ McCarthy better is good with me. So let me just wrap our conversation with that. JJ McCarthy, as of right now, is going to be the Vikings quarterback. To you, it seems so expected that he would just be the quarterback, but does it strike you as interesting at all that they let a 14-win, 35-touchdown quarterback go for JJ McCarthy and then called another guy and, a legend and said, hey, what do you think about playing here? Or he called them or whoever called who. I mean, it's such a unique situation. I can't think of anything like it where you would not franchise tag Sam Darnold, but then still consider having someone else be your quarterback.
Yeah, it's kind of a zoo, but it's just, I think like Quessy said, it's like dotting your T's, cross your I's, just any avenue to team building he's going to explore. If you cut yourself off entirely from options, well, then you'll miss some low hanging fruit at times. So, I mean, obviously they haven't done it. It's just something very preliminary. And from all sides, it doesn't seem like it's actually going to happen. But no, it never surprised me that they let Darnold go. I think that was decided weeks 18 and, in the wild card round, that just, you can't lay eggs the way he did and expect to get that next chance when that's your MO, right? That was his problem at every other stop along the way. And when the plan was all along to shoot for the moon with JJ McCarthy, you don't draft a rookie quarterback to pay then a starting quarterback money. So you do that. So you have this window of Super Bowl opportunity. So yeah, I'm not necessarily surprised. I do just think the Aaron Rodgers thing is just, again, I almost think you almost want your GM to explore that opportunity. And who JJ McCarthy is. You think he's going to be rattled by that? Like that guy's like, it might even make him better to bring in an Aaron Rodgers, right? Like that might bring even more out of him come the fall. So yeah, I do think it's good GMing as opposed to bad GMing if anyone's criticizing it.
So how good do you think JJ McCarthy be and or will be? And keep this in mind. If I told you that last year in training camp was a best case scenario for him based on what you would have seen in your evaluation of him coming out, and I told you that he made huge gains and that he looked like a leader right away and was picking up the offense, improving his accuracy down the football field. So best case scenario for a lot of those things. How good would you project him to be right away?
I mean, I think you talk about the Vikings situation the same way you talk about, like the 49ers and what they've had the past, 5 years. And if Brock Purdy can put up the numbers he can, I don't see what JJ McCarthy can't do similarly. I don't think, and he has a much better arm. I think he has a better arm than even Darnold does in terms of his ability to attack down the football field. Now, there's obviously big things he needed to change, and we didn't get to see live. Live's very different from even preseason. So we'll see. But I think best case scenario is, I think you replicate what Darnold did. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibilities whatsoever. And I think it's fairly likely. I think it'd be more surprising if he really crashed and burned than it would if he played better than Darnold, just given everything around him and the fact that like it's better to sit the guy year one. It's as much as maybe Vikings fans may not have wanted it to go that way. It's better to have that stress off of you when you're preparing every single week and getting that NFL playbook. And now he's going to hit the ground week one this NFL season as ready as he can possibly be and not have his head spinning.
I think what they can be is less of a boomer bust offense. With Sam Darnold, it was so much whip it down the field, get explosive plays, but it was not really a consistent beating drum type of offense that was sustaining long drives over and over again. They didn't have a whole lot of a quick game. And McCarthy, I think, sees the middle of the field a lot better. And we'll have a TJ Hockenson for a full year. He'll have a better interior offensive line. I mean, I think if you superimposed the way that Darnold played last year into what they've added, you would have a really incredible team, but you can't really do that money wise. I mean, that would be pretty tough to pay a guard 17 million, a new center, a new running back that they got, and still franchise tag him, which I think he was leaving if he wasn't franchise tagged. So that is the risk that the Vikings have to take. But if you're going to take a risk with a different quarterback, doing it with Jefferson, Addison, Hockenson, Darisaw, O'Neal, I mean, it's about as good as it gets, and the coach of the year. So he is well set up. If he can't do it, then he can't do it because you can't quickly get set up any better. Right. Pushing the Pile is the podcast with you and Kyle Long. CBS Sports.net, I assume, is still the website. I don't know. People don't use websites.
I think it's .com now.
Oh, it is .com. Okay, good. Though that's where people can find a lot of your work as always. And great to have you for the 117th time on the show. I really appreciate your time, man. I'm glad we could do this.
For sure, Matt. Thanks for having me, man.
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. What was your favorite plan?
Okay. Of those, I probably liked sit at 24 and think that one guy's going to fall. I do just think there are some very good prospects. And again, like I mentioned, Malachi Starks, those DTs that you touched on, I'm trying to think of who else could even be on the board. That would be interesting. Like even if like Will Johnson, seeing what's happened to him, if he falls like close in your range, a mini jump up, I know it might cost a little bit and you don't have the picks to do it, but like that to me is probably just right at 24. I think one of those guys will fall.
Okay. I like it. All right. Goodbye. Football.